Finding classified documents in Joe's possession has become a very odd yet very concerning game of Where's Waldo? The show starts now. Well, folks, another batch of classified documents has been found in Joe's possession, this time in a garage-adjacent room in his Delaware home. So that brings the count to this so far. Documents found in a closet at the Penn Biden Center. They actually found those just days before the midterm elections, though it took over 2 months to report it. Convenient. Then in December, they found some more documents in the garage of Biden's private home in Wilmington, Delaware. But don't worry, they were next to his prized Corvette, so basically Fort Knox, folks. But wait, there's more. Last week, his personal attorneys found more classified material at his home. On Thursday of last week, the dumbest woman to ever stand behind anything told us the search was complete. It wasn't. On Saturday, the White House lawyer announced he discovered 5 more pages of classified documents at Biden's Wilmington home. None of this material was found via FBI raid, mind you. That's only reserved for political enemies of the deep state, so don't expect a raid of Jill's underwear drawer anytime soon. But don't worry, Biden and team are fully cooperating, and he is still mystified as to how those documents got there and what's in them. The dementia card works for Joe, but it doesn't work for KJP, who has had a hell of a time explaining all of this. I mean, it's just painful to watch.
You have said repeatedly, the president has said he takes classified documents very seriously. Does he think the garage is an appropriate place to store classified material?
He was surprised that the records were there.
Documents were found on December 20th in his garage in Wilmington. Why was that not immediately addressed? Is the White House being transparent about that?
We have been transparent here. So can you just clear this up? I would refer you back to the statement. I don't have anything more to say.
And then on these documents, how could anyone be that irresponsible? Isn't that what this president says about mishandling classified documents?
The president spoke to this personally. He spoke to this personally, and he believes that classified documents and information should be taken seriously. He takes them seriously.
Well, that was insightful. But here's what I want to know. If the first batch was found in early November at the Penn Biden Center, yes, before the midterms, and just 2 months after Mar-a-Lago was raided and Trump was publicly shamed, why did it take so long to report on it? Plus, even after the existence of the first batch was revealed last week, why was there no mention of the second batch that was found in December in Delaware? And why were Biden's personal lawyers conducting the searches of his homes? Playing dumb or even being dumb is not full cooperation, Joe and friends. It's just not. And I'm going to give you my theory later in final thoughts. But first, I'm digging deeper into this whole charade with Town Hall senior writer Julio Rosas. That's next.
We have asked for an assessment in the intelligence community of the Mar-a-Lago documents. I think we ought to get that same assessment of the documents found in the think tank as well as the home of President Biden. I'd like to know what these documents were. I'd like to know what the IC's assessment is, whether there was any risk of exposure and what the harm would be and whether any mitigation needs to be done.
I mean, pretty typical of the mainstream media to get expert guidance on classified Joe from the congressman who spent years peddling a false Russiagate narrative, even when he knew it was a load of BS. But what else do you really expect from ABC News? Joining me now with his take on that and so much more is townhall.com senior writer Julio Rosas. Julio, I'm glad to have you with me. I want to start with all this classified Joe mumbo jumbo. Over the weekend, we find another batch and a whole lot more information's coming out. What is your top line thoughts? How do you think they discovered all this classified information, and why do you think it took so long to get the news out?
Well, for quick background, I actually held a security clearance when my time in the Marine Corps Reserves. My job required to handle classified information, and so when we were going through training, we were taught the different ways to handle it and what to do and what not to do. And obviously what President Biden has done, and apparently has been doing for a long time, is he's violated very basic rules for keeping and storing classified documentation. And of course, when we talk about with what's happened with Trump, the main difference is that he was vice president and not president. There's different authorities that come with that. But in terms of, why they've all of a sudden kind of found this or, have come out with the news for this after it's been known for a while. I mean, it's obviously pretty clear that they wanted to keep it under wraps during the midterms. Do I think it would have made much of a difference? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, obviously the results were not what Republicans were hoping for, but it would just have definitely been another issue that is on a mountain of issues that have come from the Biden administration. So I really think that, you know, this attempt to downplay what has been happening with how he handled this type of documentation is, of course, expected from the mainstream media. But people need to really understand that, the intent is, whether the intent's there or not, he did break all these rules.
So I have to ask you, you once had a security clearance. If you had placed classified documents next to your sports car in your garage, would you be in jail right now, Julio?
I would definitely be in the brig and be charged under the UCMJ and all a host of other stuff. I mean, it would not have been good. Now, of course, I don't also have a son who's addicted to drugs and also has access to that. So that might have been the key difference there. But I mean, but in all seriousness, that's why. I mean, I remember when we were going through the schoolhouse, our instructors were telling us, similarly, since this was back in 2015. With the way Hillary Clinton handled classified information and how if they had done what she had did or had done, it would not have been good. So this is just another example of how because Democrat. It's funny seeing the two side by sides the mainstream media have put out with the graphics between what Trump did and what Biden has done. It's literally the epitome of, well, it's okay if we do it.
Well, and then you brought up Hunter Biden, which I think is interesting because we're getting more information now that he was paying old Papa like 50 grand a month to stay in the house, which is also very odd. I mean, that's some pretty expensive rent for a home in Delaware. I think we're going to find more information, possibly linked to Hunter Biden, but I have a theory on all of this. I'm going to go into deeper detail later in my show. But now, as you mentioned before, it was really downplayed in November, December, but now I think they're upping the ante on the coverage of this. I think even the mainstream media that has spent so much time coddling Joe, I think they have their sights set on him, and I think he's a target now because I think they want Joe out of the way. I want your quick thoughts on that before we move on.
It is interesting because when you look at the things that have really been damaging to his presidency is the Afghanistan withdrawal, which obviously was completely botched. But this one is also pretty significant, pretty damaging because, again, with the attempts to explain it away, when you actually look at what was done and how the length that they've had these documents in these areas, it's also pretty damaging as well. So I think you're right in the sense that this is maybe another opportunity for people who are looking ahead in 2024 as just another chink in the armor that he has somehow managed to weather, because I cover the border crisis extensively, and that hasn't hurt him as much as some of the other topics that I've just laid out.
Yeah, because it's what Democrats choose to shine a light on that matters to people, and that's why they are now able to shine a light on it, because they want to get Joe out of the way. The things that they don't shine a light on, people don't care about. Isn't it funny how that works? I'm glad you brought it up, though, because I know that you've been doing a lot of reporting on what's happening not only at our southern border, but people often forget Florida, and they forget the coastline, and they forget the Keys. But right now, that area is being inundated with illegal immigrants. I know that you've been covering this. What exactly is going on in the Keys, and how nervous should Floridians and Americans be by the inundation that they're now starting to see in that part of the world?
So I literally just got back from the Florida Keys. I was with the Florida National Guard. I was embedded with them, going on patrols in the air. And basically, I mean, the reason why that they're there is because just like with the southern border, I mean, people coming from Cuba and Haiti have been happening for a very long time. But just like with the southern border, under this administration, it has gotten exponentially worse. And a lot of these towns, I mean, Key West is the biggest city there, and it's not that big by the rest of the country standards. And so when you have 200, 300, 400 people showing up within a very short amount of time, that is going to be very taxing on the local services. It's very taxing on accommodations for them, because the Border Patrol station is definitely not set up to house that many people over a marathon. So it was very interesting to see that the Biden White House saying that Governor DeSantis ordering the National Guard to help out at their request is a political stunt that put people's lives at risk when they are literally running missions to detect if there are any boats in distress, because the Straits of Florida are not an easy thing to go through, even with regular boats.
Well, and listen, I've actually had a little bit of knowledge, because I'm also very close to Border Patrol, that have been sounding the alarm to me on this for at least the last year and a half, saying we're seeing more activity in this area. Of course, the spotlight has been shown on Texas and Arizona and their border crisis, but this has been increasing and increasing, and now it's finally getting some media attention because Governor DeSantis is having to deploy the National Guard and pay attention to this region. But I'll also say this. So there's a lot of Cubans coming over, and we feel for the Cuban people. My husband is Cuban. His family is all from Cuba. So we feel for these people that are fleeing oppression and they're fleeing communism. They might actually have legitimate asylum claims, but it also speaks to the bigger picture. It doesn't matter who's coming over here. We cannot absorb that many people, and now they're coming in at every nook and cranny they possibly can. What has Border Patrol as well as the National Guard told you about what they think they're going to see in the coming months in that region?
They think they're going to see basically, hopefully, the fruits of the National Guard's labor in terms of deterrence, because now, since there's more eyes on the shores and in the waters, there are definitely going to be greater chances of people being interdicted before they even reach American shores. One of the most concerning things that I learned, a former Border Patrol agent who was stationed in the Keys, he told me that there are now only 3 agents and 3 supervisors permanently assigned to the Keys. That is a significant drop from 22 agents back in 2015, 2016. And there's multiple reasons why agents have decided to leave or retire even prior to this. But obviously, when, just like with the southern border, they can't patrol the shoreline because they are too busy processing 100 people, which is totally abnormal for that region. And so the numbers are smaller, but proportion to what the responsibilities are, it is completely overwhelming. But even still, I mean, in fiscal year 2022, Border Patrol encountered over 4,000 people when the norm was 1,000 people per fiscal year. So, I mean, this is definitely I mean, it's no coincidence that it's happening right now under this administration. People see what the Biden administration is allowing, and they're willing to take that risk within the ocean, just like with the desert. So it's very tragic to see that. But it's also tragic that Americans in these communities are once again bearing the brunt of this.
Yeah, I also wonder what it's going to be like in that area. That's a vacation destination. So it's one thing when it's happening in small border towns in Arizona and Texas. It's another thing when it's happening in the Florida Keys. Luckily, they have a great governor that's going to do everything that he can. So I'm very hopeful and optimistic about their response there. Last thing I want to ask you about, because I know that you were heavily involved and embedded during the Summer of Love 2020 with those mostly peaceful riots. And in fact, you wrote a book about it. I want to make sure I get the title here. Fiery but mostly peaceful, the 2020 riots and the gaslighting of America. I love that title. I love the book. Real quick, what would my viewers read about in your book? What did you experience, and what are you going to tell about?
If people were to buy the book, they were going to find out what actually happened. And I was as many places I could be. I couldn't be in 2 places at once, unfortunately, but I was at Minneapolis, Kenosha, here in Washington, D.C. for the riots that were happening here. And it was my firsthand account, along with the firsthand account of survivors who went through even worse things than what I saw about that. Yes, there were protests in 2020, but there were also riots. And these were riots from the BLM movement, from the Antifa movement. I spent time in Portland multiple times. And it's just, it's supposed to be history because as we saw, and as the title implies, I mean, that's where I literally get my title from that CNN chyron from Kenosha, where they were trying to downplay riots that were happening there. And so people are going to know the truth of what happened. And it's unfortunate that it has to fall to someone who works at a small conservative outlet to be one of the few people who was out there on the ground and just trying to get the word out on what I was seeing. But that's what happened. And even still today, people wanted to talk about January 6th, which I was also there to cover and also talk about in the book. But the 2020 riots were also real, and they also affected real people, and it caused major damage. And we are still feeling the effects today when it comes to policing and the high crime rates that we're now currently experiencing, unfortunately, in our cities. And so, I mean, there's a direct line between today and what happened almost 3 years ago now.
Yeah, and January 6th was one day, and the summer of riots was an entire summer long, and in some places like Portland, it continued much longer than that. But I thank you for documenting the history, because you're right, people quickly forgot about that time. And when COVID took a hiatus, by the way, we also remember that. But it's nice that we have people out there like yourself that are willing to not only embed yourself in dangerous situations, essentially what was a war zone, but also to tell about it for those that are going to conveniently forget. So I think it's fantastic. I love the title of your book. Thanks for everything that you've done and all the investigative work that you've been doing, even when it's not fun and even when it's a little dangerous. Julio, thank you so much for being with me today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Still ahead, this former Virginia Tech soccer player refused to kneel for St. George Floyd and BLM, and she alleges her coach retaliated and punished her for it. But even after the settlement, there's still a lot of controversy surrounding this case. The brave young woman who refused to kneel for the mob, Kiersten Hening, joins me next. It all started in the summer of 2020, the summer of love, if you'll recall, when individuals, corporations, and athletic departments alike posted black squares and dropped to their knees in remembrance of St. George Floyd and the money-making domestic terror organization known as BLM. Now, many Americans, young and old, felt pressure to join this movement, and many did indeed go along to get along, bend, cave, and kneel to the woke mob. Well, not my next guest. When she refused to kneel for BLM before her Virginia Tech soccer team played UVA, she was allegedly punished by her coach, Charles Chugger Adair. Kiersten Hening alleges she was singled out, scolded, benched, and retaliated against for refusing to kneel. She could have taken it, could have folded and got on a knee, but instead she decided to file a lawsuit in defense of her First Amendment rights. Now, this lawsuit ended in a $100,000 settlement from Coach Adair, but the story doesn't end there. Now, 76 current and former members of Virginia Tech soccer have come together to put out a joint statement in support of their coach. Joining me now with the real story is that brave soccer player, the patriot who refused to cede her ground for her knee to the mob, Kiersten Hening. Kiersten, thank you for being with me. And first of all, let me say thank you for sticking your neck out there for First Amendment rights and freedom. Not many your age are willing to do it, and it's a testament to you and your family that you were brave enough to do it from the get-go.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So before we get to all the latest developments, I want to go back to when this initially happened. So this was a very weird time in our country. Everybody was bowing down. Everybody was getting on a knee, posting a black square, whether they really believed in the sentiment of BLM or what have you. Everybody was really getting in on this. And of course, a lot of universities, they followed suit. Some even led the charge. So your team was going to kneel in solidarity. Is that correct, for George Floyd and BLM?
That's correct. Before ACC games, they were going to read a unity statement. At the time, we didn't know what it was going to say. They just told us it was going to be a moment of silence, if you will, before starting games in that 2020 season.
Now, it's one thing if they want to read a little statement and everyone wants to join hands or whatever. I mean, it's woke, it's a virtue signal, but whatever. But it was the kneeling that you took issue with. Tell me why that was problematic for you.
Yeah, it was problematic just because I felt as though it was very synonymous with what Colin Kaepernick was doing at the time. I also didn't feel as though I needed to kneel in support of something to support it. So I knew going into that game and that season really that I was not going to kneel for anything. So it started at that UVA game, not kneeling for that unity statement.
So then after that, as your lawsuit describes, your coach, he singled you out. He didn't kick you off the team, but he certainly made it known that your refusal to kneel was going to have repercussions. Tell me what happened to you and tell me how the team treated you after you refused to kneel.
Yeah, so really at halftime of the UVA game was when things kind of started to unravel. And then after that, it was kind of a domino effect throughout film sessions. Of him targeting me and then subsequently benching me basically for the next 2 games. And then unfortunately, it just got so unbearable and suffocating that I felt as though I needed to step away from the team.
How did the rest of the team treat you? Were they kind of in on this, pile on? Did they look at you a certain way? Or were there other members of the team that maybe felt similar to the way you did, but didn't have the courage to stand up for themselves like you were able to do?
Yeah, I think like you touched on, it was definitely a time that was very difficult. There were difficult conversations, and the political climate that was created within athletics and everywhere in the country really was hard to be in if you were not thinking as similarly with the mob mentality, right? I think people struggled to stand up for themselves and stand up for what they believed in because they were scared of getting targeted and labeled and called all of these names. So at first when I left the team, my teammates were supportive of me. They reached out to me with messages of support and that they would always be there for me. And some people have done a 180, which is okay. I think you referenced the 76 women, which I think it's great that they're voicing their opinion and practicing their First Amendment right as well. But I do think it's important to note that a lot of those people weren't there at that time that this happened. And I think it's hard to be able to put themselves in our shoes at that time who were there during that season when all of that was going on. And it was a tough environment to be in.
Do you think that your coach and others tried to peg you as a racist simply because you wouldn't kneel for BLM in this unity statement, this charade, if you will? Is that what they wanted you to feel like to the outside world? A racist, a bigot, all of those things?
I can tell you that's what it felt like. It was, I never judge anyone on color. I never have. I was raised, by parents who instilled morals and values in me, and I've never looked at someone differently because of their color. And it's unfortunate that people are so quick to throw that term around. Up until really the summer of 2020, people didn't go around calling other people racist just to do so, especially when it wasn't backed with anything. Just kneeling or not kneeling or what have you. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it was a whole time of pressure where people were made to feel like they needed to post something, and it's something that really didn't advance anything for anyone. It was a worthless virtue signal, but if you didn't participate in it, you were looked at in a certain way. But I have to ask you, a lot of people in your position, being a college soccer player, would have said, hey, listen, I'm not going to do it. I essentially was pushed off the team because of my refusal to do it, but I'm about done anyway. It's all right. I'm not going to take legal action. That seems like a lot of work. It seems like an uphill battle. It seems expensive. Why did you decide to go for it?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, I was just raised that way. Going into that season and when all that stuff was happening, I knew what I was going to do going into it. I never could have planned for, the repercussions of standing up for what I believed in. After all that happened and I sought out legal counsel, I was so blessed with incredible lawyers, an incredible support system. So it was a no-brainer for me that I was going to fight until the end for what I believed in. And my hope is that I can inspire others to do that. I think, like you said, most people would do that, and most people do that. They say, oh, I don't want to go through this, and you don't want to sacrifice your reputation and all that kind of stuff. But I don't regret it one bit, and I would do it all over again.
So have you had any interactions with this coach since this has all happened? I mean, you got a settlement, $100,000. I don't believe it's money that you were after. It was more to make a statement, which I believe is one that's powerful and will set a precedent and is a powerful statement to make. But has this coach, has he treated you differently? Have you seen him? Have you interacted with him? What's it been like since all this has gone down?
Yeah, like you said, I was never after the money. At first we weren't asking for money. And it did dwindle down to that legally and all that kind of stuff. But it was never about the money. It was always about playing the game that I loved. And, unfortunately, he did what he did. And it has essentially paid for my college career. Right. And right now I'm in nursing school, and $100,000 is a lot of money for a 22-year-old. So I have not interacted with him. I have not seen him. I do wish him the best, and I hope that this can, inspire him to be better and not do this to anybody else while he's coaching or in his lifetime.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me how lopsided this whole situation is when it comes to athletic departments, when it comes to the university system as a whole. If you're on one side of the political narrative, you are celebrated. If you're on the other side, you are punished. And then if you decide to use your First Amendment rights to speak out about it and say this is wrong, then you're really punished. But I think you've done the right thing here, and I think you've sent a message. There have been so many, and I gotta say, so many young women like yourself that have stood up for themselves, whether it comes to boys competing in women's sports or like yourself saying, I have a First Amendment right. I mean, I think it's powerful that young people like you are doing this, because I think you would agree a lot of your peers would never have the intestinal fortitude. So in closing, what is your message to others that may not be in your same position, but maybe in a similar one where they feel like they can't say something, they feel like the power is all against them, and they should just sit down and shut up?
Yeah, I would say just to never sacrifice your beliefs or your morals or your values to conform to the mob mentality. I think it's really easy to do, and most people do it. But like I said, I don't regret what I've done, and I would like to think that I have inspired other people. You know, people have reached out to me, whether it be through social media platforms or through mutual people, expressing just how much this has inspired them. And that is something that I wanted to do at the beginning of this, and I'm just glad that I've set that tone for other people to be able to say, hey, she did that, so I can do that. And that's the goal, and I hope I do inspire people in that way.
You certainly do, and there are not many like you out there, so keep it up. You have a bright future ahead. Thanks for spending time talking to me about this today. And freedom over everything. You always got to stand up for those rights, because if we don't, who will? Thanks so much for joining me, and best of luck to you and your future endeavors.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Coming up, things aren't looking good for classified Joe Biden, but I have a hunch it's not just we Republicans that have our eyes on this. My final thoughts are next. They may have found classified documents next to Joe's classic Corvette, but it's under the bus they're about to throw their useful puppet. It's time for final thoughts. Joe has been in office nearly 2 years, and yes, it feels like much longer, but for these last 2 years, plus the 2 prior he campaigned from the basement, the mainstream media, along with fellow Democrats, have covered for Joe. All they needed to do was get him over the finish line and into the White House. They successfully installed that man like the increasingly dim light bulb he is, and it worked. The successfully weaponized impeachments, the pandemic, and mass mail-in voting to get their guy elected. And he's been useful for the radical left. He's pushed through major climate change legislation and other Green New Deal policies disguised as infrastructure and inflation reduction. And he's done it all while barely being awake. It's an accomplishment, but not for the right reasons. But it's no secret Joe is sleeping. That whole weekend at Bernie charade can only work so long. The expiration date on it and Joe himself is coming. And in fact, it may have already come. Enter news of these batches of classified documents found in various Biden nooks and crannies. Even the mainstream media is covering it, and even leftist pundits and his fellow Democrats seemed alarmed at the findings. Or is it feigned shock and alarm? Follow me as we connect the dots in this very political game of Clue. They've known about at least one batch of these documents since early November of last year. They had to keep it quiet so they could keep the heat on Trump's documents and his alleged criminal activity. But now the cat is out of the bag, and it's my sincere belief that not only are Democrats okay with their man going down, but I go as far as to say it was Democrats who leaked the news. Why? Because they don't want to be pigeonholed into a futile life support campaign leading up to 2024. They don't want Biden. These findings of classified documents at Casa, Closet, and Garage a la Biden makes it a lot easier and a lot cleaner for them to move away from Joe. Yes, if you listen closely, hear that? You can hear a man in the Sacramento, California governor's mansion readying his hair gel. You can hear a very disappointing diversity pick greasing up her broom. A man named Chasten picking out decor for the White House holiday display. And if you listen really, really closely, you can even hear a nasty woman somewhere in Chappaqua, New York, steaming a pantsuit. They are sitting on ready. Wait for it. But before we go today, I'd like to wish a very, very happy birthday to them.
Well, look, my wife has a rule in her family. When somebody's birthday, sing happy birthday. You ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Alan. Happy birthday to you. Well,
but those are just my final thoughts. From Nashville, God bless and take care.